Welcome back, everyone, to the Space City X-Files, episode 11. Today we cover the details and theories over the intriguing Montauk project. Now, if you're not familiar with this case, it has conspiracy, time travel, cryptids, and, we have to have some good old government cover-ups. That's got to be in there. And, so let's dive into the details of this amazing story that is also credited with the inspiration behind the hit Netflix series Stranger Things. And don't worry, by the end of the show, you'll know why that is. So before we go on, real quick, let's go over the announcements. Space City X-Files thanks you for listening today, and we thank you for your continued support. If you would like to support the show, there are three main ways to do that, and I'll let you know about those now. If you would like to become a member of the show and gain access to unreleased episodes, our private Discord group, and free merchandise, then you can visit the website and click on the Patreon tab. Once there, you can sign up for a $5 or $10 a month plan. If you're not quite ready for a monthly membership, that's totally understandable. If you would just like to make a one-time donation on the website, there's a support us with tip tab. Once there, you can type in whatever amount you want. 50 cents, $1, $5, it's all appreciated the same. All monetary donations from you go right back into the show, an effort to constantly improve the finished product. The third and most effective way to support the show is to leave a review wherever you listen. I can't stress this enough. With your feedback, we can improve our craft, and it also brings in new listeners, which is priceless. Again, thank you for your support, and now we'll start the show. So, as we mentioned in the intro, there are many facets to the Montauk conspiracy theory, and many take place at the Montauk Air Force Station. So before we look into the main characters, let's take a look at this base and see if we can find any interesting details. So Montauk has always been a point of strategic military importance. Since way back during the American Revolution, our leaders have realized the importance of protecting this area because of its remoteness and its location between two major cities. Now, over the years, Montauk has been an established base that acted as an early warning system and artillery support installation. And a very interesting fact was that it was like a standalone community. So it had recreation parts, it had barracks, training sites, and even its own power grid. And the whole architectural design of the town was pretty cool too, because the creators made it in a way that disguised it as a normal fishing town. So the building roofs had like false steeple-like tops, along with decorative dormers. So during the war times, if the enemy came through in boats or planes, they would likely approach unguarded until it was too late, as the Montauk site also had heavy artillery guns attached that could amass some serious damage. Now, eventually the Montauk Air Force Station would become a top-of-the-line facility with many first-time technological breakthroughs being put into practice there. But pertaining to this case, there's one in particular, and that's the AN/FPS-35 radar system. Now, this system here was about as good as it could get for a long time, and it wouldn't be until satellite tracking came along that it finally became obsolete. Now, the antenna on this device was so strong that it could detect up to 200 miles away, and it was impervious to duplicated or fabricated sounds that the enemy would often try to use to mislead what was actually in the waters. So in the case of the Montauk area, the antenna had to be taken off service and recalibrated many times because it was causing people's electronics in their homes outside the area to malfunction. Now, this is where Preston Nichols comes into the story. So Preston grew up and lived in the area in the 60s. And around the time the antenna for the radar system was installed, Preston happened to be doing a research project on psychic telepathy. Now, he was a pretty smart guy. He claimed to have degrees in parapsychology, psychology, and electrical engineering. So Preston's claim was that mental telepathy waves were very similar to radio waves, and this was what he was trying to prove with his research. Now, Preston was very reserved in the information that he gave out about his work. He only gave out the basics on what he was doing, and never divulged who was funding him. So that's kind of mystery in itself. But anyways, Preston has this research going on, and he has a few self-proclaimed psychics working with him. And then one day he starts to notice a trend. So Preston states around a certain time of the day, each day, the mental telepathy abilities of the psychics diminished to an almost non-existent level. Why could this be happening? Well, since Preston felt there was an obvious connection between telepathy and radio waves, he asked himself a question. What could be the cause of a bad radio reception? Well, it would have to come from some type of jamming device, he reasons, or a much stronger signal that is causing the weaker ones to fail. With this obstruction now affecting his work, Preston, having a background in electrical engineering, creates a type of portable receiver that can basically take readings of nearby signal strength. Preston attaches this device to his car and just drives around the coastal Montauk area until he locates the strongest signal on the island, which just so happens to be where the antenna is located. Now, remember that this place is a fully functional military base at that time, so it's not like he can request a tour or anything. The best information Preston could get was from a public relations officer who told him the antenna was being used by the FAA for flight tracking and early warning air defenses. At that time, unfortunately, this was all Preston can get, and it would just have to be enough. Now, many years later, circa 1980, the Montauk Air Force Station is decommissioned and retired from use. The military basically calls it quits due to technological advancements, I suppose. But anyhow, they turned it over to the city of New York, and they changed the name to Camp Hero. It's reported that the site basically sat vacant ever since because of it's reported that another high security facility that was located too close to it, and it would have been too much of a risk to open it up to the public. I don't know what facility they were talking about. I looked it up and down around the area, and all I could find was Plum Island, which has a Center for Disease Control. That's got a little bit of mystery around it itself. And then there would be Brookhaven National Laboratory, but that's about 50 miles back down the coast, headed back towards New York. And so they were both a good distance away, so I'm not sure which facility they were talking about. But anyway, so Preston then hears about the closing of the base, and his curiosity kicks in. So he hadn't forgotten all those years ago about the huge disturbances that caused issues with his research and local television receptions, so he decides he's going to go check it out. Now, Preston and his amigo are able to get in contact with someone who is overseeing the property, and he doesn't say who he spoke to or exactly how the conversation went, but the representative pretty much tells Preston, go ahead and go check the place out if you want, and there will be a groundskeeper / guard that's there. And if you tell him that I said you can go visit, he'll let you in. So Preston's like, hell yeah, and he goes to check the place out. Now, once they're down in the basement area, Preston's friend, who also happened to be one of his members on his telepathy research team, starts to tell Preston how uneasy he's feeling. He says that there was a type of dark energy and it's getting hard for him to breathe. So now, Preston's not a psychic, but he can tell that there's something down there also. He just feels it. So he asks his friend if he can do a reading right then and there, Reluctantly, the friend agrees, and he immediately starts to pick up pictures and is overcome by an onslaught of repressed memories. Now, at first, he's incoherent, almost mumbling to himself, but then he looks at Preston and starts to tell him what he saw. So he tells Preston that they both have been there before. In fact, they both worked there. Preston worked there as an electrical engineer, and he himself as a psychic helping to test the devices out. What devices? Preston asks. What test? As his friend starts to explain, Preston then has his own mental breakthrough. And not only does he remember everything that went down there, he also remembers why he forgot them in the first place. So Preston remembers as clearly as day now all the dark experiments, from opening portals to other dimensions to contacting extraterrestrial life and trading with them to gain their superior technology. He recalls them creating time machines there for the very first time and discovering a way to control people's minds and read their thoughts. Eventually, he recalls a particular experiment that crossed the line according to his own personal moral compass, causing him to desert his team. That was when at some point they erased his memory clean of anything that transpired down in that basement. Now, after all this went down, Preston claims that it opened a floodgate of people that just showed up into his life claiming that they knew him and claiming that they worked down at the base with him. Now, how this happened, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it's the law of attraction, or maybe it's psychic magnetism. Maybe when Preston's memory was restored, it started a domino effect of others who still lived in the area, and it caused them to remember who they really were. And it also could have been just someone, someone higher up at work. Maybe they wanted to blow the whistle on the things that went down in the past. I mean, think about it. What if they did indeed find a way to control minds? Then simply put it in Preston's head to visit the Montauk base after it closed, and then unlock the suppressed memories that the others had. If Preston was right that the telepathic waves were similar to radio waves, it would be unrecognizable if someone sent a signal to you, causing an action to be taken. Like if you punch the button on your gate controller and it starts to open. In November of 1984, Preston gets a visitor at his home, a man named Duncan, and although Duncan doesn't come out and say they work together at the Montauk base, Preston immediately feels a connection to him. Duncan states that he heard Preston was the man whenever it came to building radio systems and was hoping that he can help him repair some audio equipment he had. During the small project, Duncan and Preston quickly become friends, and Duncan states in a conversation one day while they're working that he feels he has a type of psychic power at times. And this is enough for Preston, and he starts to believe that Duncan being there was more than just a coincidence or more than just a referral from someone in town. So one day he doesn't tell Duncan where they're headed. He just tells him that he'd like to get his opinion on something, so they head out and eventually arrive at the Montauk Air Force Station. This time there's no guards, so they just hop the fence and they start their way to the entrance. Now, Preston, thinking he would try and have Duncan do a reading after he showed him around a bit, is completely surprised when Duncan's response, when he sees Duncan's response to the place. Now, it's like once they arrive inside, Duncan's mind and memories quickly synchronize to its surroundings. So instead, it's Duncan showing Preston around, and he's recalling what used to be here and what used to happen over there. Now, once they make it down to the basement, the whole story somehow comes full circle, back to both their memories. They did, in fact, know each other because they both participated in a particular experiment that involved projecting things from memory into reality, and Duncan was the most gifted person that could use this device. Now, if the Montauk chair doesn't sound familiar to you, this is the device they used for this purpose. So Duncan states he would sit down in this chair and link up to this large computer system that worked in conjunction with this large radar antenna they put in a while back. He then states that his thoughts would basically be coded by the radio waves, and then afterwards another device would materialize that code into a physical property. Now, we've mentioned in the forefront that all kinds of experiments went on, and this is where the Stranger Things inspiration comes into play. So Preston remembers being in charge of developing young children as, quote, psi-fighters. Apparently, these children had very strong telepathic capabilities and can control minds and read thoughts, and when hooked up to the chair, they could become even more powerful. Now, at some point, these experiments became all too much for Preston and Duncan, and they devised a plan to put it all to a stop. Now, the idea was, when Duncan was in the chair, one day Preston would seal the room off and give them the signal to start the plan, and once it was a go, Duncan would imagine the most beastly monster that he could possibly think of, and he would use it to scare everyone and also use it to destroy all the equipment in the room. Now, this should be enough to make people see that what they were dealing with is way too much for them to handle. So, they proceed. Preston gives Duncan the signal. He visualizes and materializes the grotesque monster that he can imagine. And once there, it tears through all the equipment and scares the shit out of everyone. And once they feel their point has been made, Preston turns off the machine and the monster is supposed to go away. But there's only one problem. This does not cause the monster to disappear like it would have with the other experiments they've done before. Instead, the monster starts to turn its focus on the personnel, killing many of the researchers. Preston can think of nothing else to do but destroy all the remaining possible power sources. So he starts to hack and unplug any and everything connected to the device. Within minutes, the monster is gone, but the unrepairable damage had already been done. Now, Preston stated shortly after this the Shadow Cell running the operation closed the project and tracked down all the remaining members and wiped their memory. This included Duncan. Still down in the basement at this point, Duncan lets Preston in on another recovered memory that had been secretly uncovered. This memory either was uncovered too early, or it was never triggered into action, but Duncan tells Preston he recalled a memory where he was programmed to assassinate Preston and then blow up the Montauk base. Now, I don't know if this was some kind of failsafe installed some time back, or insurance of some type, but Duncan, now having uncovered that someone tried to implant it into his head, swore to Preston that he has no loyalty to whoever put it there, and that they should go public in case something should happen to either one of them. Now, to this, Preston agrees, and shortly after, at the United States Psychotronic Association meeting, Preston and Duncan, after giving a lecture, go live with their story, and thus follows the struck chord that still reverbs on the lips of theorists today, 4 decades later. And these are the consolidated details, and I say consolidated because, there's only so much time that you can spend on one topic, and in this case, covered in complete detail, it would probably be like a 4-part episode. And let's face it, in today's world, most of us, because of how busy the world keeps us, we can barely afford to listen to a 30-minute podcast, much less the 4-hour one. So, but then again, hey, these podcast episodes, they're just made to introduce you to the topics. And I advise you, as always, if you find this case interesting, do some research of your own, and you won't regret it. And so, okay, well now let's move on to the last segment of the show, and it's where we look at the theories and interesting facts surrounding the Montauk case. And it was hard not to tell these during the case details because they're so interesting and important, but for context, it was best that we saved them until now. So I'll go ahead and get the possible theories out of the way, because in this case, it's really simple. Now, what I've come to know is that people either think all of the people involved, like Preston, Duncan, David, Al, Stewart, and all the others, are just completely crazy, and the craziness was contagious and it spread to all of them. Or you have the people on the other side of the fence who believe what they say is completely true. Where that leaves us is, what are the reasons for them to make that argument? One of the main reasons for people to say that it was just a good old science fiction tale was because Well, Preston listed the book as science fiction. And I don't know why he did that. It could have just been because he needed to pick a category and he decided to go with that one. Or it could have been that, he just did it for promotional purposes. I don't know for sure. But what I can say is if I ended the story here now without letting you in on all the other mysteries and details that suggest all this did happen, if I stopped right now because of how far out the story is, it's too easy to throw it in the science fiction pile. Hence, many people who do not know the full story do just that. And it's because there's so many conspiracies tied to it, and I'm talking events that actually happened and have been documented, shrouded in mystery on their own. So to fully understand this case, you really need to understand the details of the Philadelphia experiment. You need to know about MK Ultra. You need to know about the Stargate program. You need to know about theories surrounding HAART, because they all lead from and circle back to this very case. And we'll touch briefly here in a little bit, but let me finish up this portion. The second main reason for people to believe this story is to be science fiction is because of the many changes in the backstories of some of the involved parties. So it's been reported that Stewart Swerdlow changed his story quite often, and he happened to be one of the main influences on Preston's book. So this caused people to kind of brush the whole idea off. But then again, I mean, these guys were supposedly were dealing with having their minds erased and reprogrammed many times. I mean, that has to have a harsh effect on the short or long-term memory, right? So would their memory be very good? I mean, would their story be consistent? I don't know. But anyway, still, these are the main reasons why the story has its doubters. And now let's look at why some people believe it to be true. So one of the reasons why I myself happen to believe something went on at Montauk Air Force Station is, for the longest, they said that there was no underground bunker, there was no tunnel, there was none of that shit. So what happens? Well, I'm going to post this link that I found from the New York Times, and it's an article. But basically, someone curious with money decides, okay, enough. I'm going to pay somebody to go and do geological graphing of the place. Basically, take some pictures of what's underneath with an X-ray machine. Well, they go and they do that, and what do they find? An extremely large cement storage area with many, many tunnels leading every which way underground. What else is included in the article is an actual parks employee, and I won't say his name just in case he doesn't work there anymore, but if you check the article out for yourself, you'll see who it is. But this employee says he had a hypnosis session from a licensed therapist, and he had a bunch of repressed memories come back. And go figure, right? And he grew up in Montauk during the 80s, so this would be around the time, he was about 12 or 13 at that time, so that would have been where the kids were being, abducted. And in his memory, he's down in the bunker. He's being tested. He's being poked and prodded on. And he says it was absolutely terrifying. He describes, in one of his sessions, he describes a yellow house hitting in an area where top of the building was partially above ground and the other part of it was below ground. And he says that's where they were keeping all the kids. And so after this session, he and a friend of his that also works there at the park, Camp Hero, they go to this place in person, and they do a slight bit of digging, and what do they hit? They hit a rooftop. And they dig a little bit further, and they get down to the siding. And what color is the siding? It's an old yellow siding. Now, this guy states that he asked his boss multiple times. I mean, they have backhoes, they have diggers there. They're constantly doing things for the park. So he asked him multiple times if he can dig the area up with a backhoe, and he's denied every time. The New York Times also reached out many times to the Parks and Rec supervisor, and they never got a return call back either. Also in the article are many testimonies from the locals that lived there their whole lives, and they even say in the 80s living in Montauk when that huge antenna was on, it just wreaked havoc on the community. The TV and the radio receptions were always shot. They experienced headaches all the time. And one last little gem the article added, the frequency used by the antenna was 425 megahertz, which just so happens to be the best frequency for entering human consciousness. So there's that. And then there's the more obvious reasons to believe it happened, like MK Ultra. Now, we're just going to cover the main idea because this is a full episode, but the gist of the topic is that MK Ultra was an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. And it was intended to develop procedures and identify drugs that could be used in interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. Now, it began in 1953 and was halted in 1973. MK Ultra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain functions, such as the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD, and other chemicals without the subject's consent, electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture were also used. I'll include the link on this one, but this sounds familiar, right? And the dates, 1953 to 1973, that would be the time where operations would have been taking place at the Montauk base. Now, the next fact also makes the case the Montauk Project was real. And this one is that the U.S. Army was in fact developing a psychic team and successfully using it to acquire information at one point in time. So, from 1978 to its closure in 1995, the Army had a unit that trained in remote viewing, which is basically like psychic seeing. They close their eyes, they concentrate, and they can see what's going on the other side of a room or the other side of the world. They use tarot card reading, and they use their psychic magnetism. Now, when it closed, the official report said that it was determined to be ineffective with a 64% accuracy rate. Well, I'd say that's pretty fucking good when someone's sitting in a room telling you what's happening on the other side of the world without ever stepping a foot over there. Which makes me think it never really closed down. It was just reassigned. The point is, these fuckers knew that it was something they should have as an asset. And so, these are the facts. These are the facts, friends. And I'm telling you that, I could go on and on. But since these cases are so intertwined, when I do a full episode over MK Ultra, Stargate, and the Philadelphia experiment cases, you'll be able to hear the whole details then in full depth. So stay tuned for those coming up soon. And I apologize too for this episode being so short. I've been sick for about 4 days now, and you can more than likely hear it in my voice. I'll try to edit out all the coughs and booger noises and stuff. But I didn't want to let you down, so I worked through the pain. But anyways, alright, I'm out here, folks. From Space City X-Files, to all of you who listen, we love you. This is Rick. We'll see you on the next episode.